Hello my friends and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 build guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're covering the best wizard in Baldur's Gate. I'm of course using Gale as the example character since he comes as a wizard, and this build is intended to allow him or a main character to be the team's wizard and help out. This build is also, I would say, viable but somewhat difficult for soloing Tactician mode. Because wizards get most of their power through versatility, you will have to use some creative methods to overcome certain challenges in solo Tactician, but because you're a full caster and wizards are so versatile, there shouldn't be any problems that you encounter that you can't overcome. The build does not change significantly between the team version of the build that's intended to be used with a group and with a full party, and the solo version of the build, but our spell selection will change somewhat. I should also mention that this title is very slightly clickbait because we aren't building the actual best wizard build, because the actual best wizard build in the game is 1 level of wizard followed by 11 levels of cleric. Because wizards use their caster level rather than their wizard level to determine what spells they can learn from scrolls, that build still gets you level 6 wizard spells as well as level 6 cleric spells, more HP of course, and the very good class features of the cleric, but that's based on something that's sort of arguably a glitch and that a lot of players think is somewhat cheesy, myself included, so we're going to be building the best wizard that actually takes levels in the wizard class. So what do wizards get? Well, wizards get the best access to spells in the game. This is because they can learn any spell that you find in a scroll that's on the wizard spell list, including some that you can't learn from leveling up. There's several unique spells you can discover in the game, as well as ones that you can get from other classes' spell lists that you aren't able to normally learn but can learn from scrolls if you happen to find them. This means that you'll have the ability to solve any problem that you come across, and because wizards are so versatile, and because the game allows you to swap your prepared spells at any given moment, as long as you're out of combat, not just at the beginning of the day, you should be able to change your current spell selection to face whatever need you might have, whether that be to invisibly sneak by a group of enemies, whether that be to open a lock, whether that be to teleport behind a barrier, or whether that be to fry a bunch of goblins with a giant fireball. Wizards, they've got it all. So, let's take a look at what we need to do to make Gale, or our main character, into the perfect wizard. So first off, Gale is a human, and human I think is actually pretty close to the top tier racial choice for a wizard, because in this game they get proficiency in light armor and shields. Shield proficiency is incredibly strong for casters because there's no penalty to having a shield in your offhand. You can use a quarterstaff as a versatile weapon and a shield in your offhand as a full weapon, with full spellcasting and everything, and it just gets you your additional 2 AC while still allowing you to cast all of your spells no problem. Armor proficiencies are extremely good because, of course, you want to be wearing the heaviest armor you have available to increase your AC. Wizards do get mage armor, and I'll talk about that in a second, but for the most part, the light armor plus shield proficiency is going to be more AC, as well as giving you the option for very powerful magical effects on armor and shields. So it's going to be better for you to generally have armor and shield proficiencies than the wizard's default no armor proficiencies at all. So human is very good. I think the actual best choice, and you'll have heard me say this a lot if you've watched any of my other guides, is the half wood elf, because they get both of those armor and shield proficiencies as well as the 35-foot movement speed that wood elves get, which is incredibly powerful. Positioning, of course, is key to a spellcaster since you need to stay out of melee, and the additional movement speed allows you to do that very well. So if you're a main character, half wood elf is the best choice, and I think human is actually quite close. I also like halfling because lucky is quite good, and preventing you from failing concentration checks on rolling a natural 1 can be very important as well, so halfling gets the nod as probably the third best choice, but I think the armor proficiencies are good. That being said, we will be getting heavy armor and shield proficiencies later in the build, so the strongest endgame build is probably going to use full wood elf or halfling. Alright, so Gale also starts with bad stats, like all the origin characters. They've given them all 3 odd numbers to start with, so the first thing we need to do is fix that. You would never want odd-numbered stats in this game because they don't give you any bonuses. So we're going to get our intelligence up to 16, that's very important, and our constitution up to 16. Almost every character in the game is going to want this split unless they need something particularly different. And then we're going to get our dexterity up to 14, also extremely important. And finally, we have 4 points to play with. We can put them in any of these. Typically, you're going to want to put them in Wisdom because Wisdom is the most important saving throw, but for a main character, you might want them in Charisma to help you with conversation skills. And you might want 2 points or so in Strength just to increase your jump distance. Jump distance is quite useful in this game, and especially if you're planning to play solo, carry weight is kind of annoying to play with very low carry weight, so you may wish to move some points into Strength as well, but the 14, 16, 16 on Dex, Constitution, and Intelligence, I think, are mandatory. For our skill selection, the only important one, I think, and the sort of unusual one, is that I actually really like having Sleight of Hand on Gale. This lets him serve as a lockpicker and prevent you from needing another dedicated Sleight of Hand character. Since he won't be making conversation checks or anything, you actually don't need the intelligence, the knowledge skills that he gets as badly, because those are mostly made during conversations. So for your other skills selection, you can pretty much take anything. It doesn't really matter, just whatever is most interesting to you. But Sleight of Hand and Stealth are the two most powerful out-of-combat skills. So for a solo character, I would take Stealth, and for Gale in a party, I would take Sleight of Hand. Then we get to choose the good stuff from Wizards. It's the spells. For our spell selection, you'll notice that there's an array of damaging spells all across the top. We only need one of these, because you'll just be using whatever the best damaging cantrip is every turn, unless an enemy is particularly resistant to that damage type. But the best damaging cantrip is Firebolt. It's 60-foot range and has the best damage die of any of the cantrips, so that's the one you're going to want to take. And then for your other two cantrips, I suggest Mage Hand and Minor Illusion. These are both incredibly useful for finding secrets on the map with Mage Hand, distracting enemies, because enemies will often attack it if they can see it, and Minor Illusion can be used to pull enemies into dangerous locations, where you can then use a Gust of Wind spell or something to knock them into a pit if you want to, or just pull enemies out of the way. For your spell selection, remember that we'll get access to all of these through scrolls, pretty much, but which ones you want to learn and have prepared is really important. You will absolutely need Shield, and I also highly recommend having Magic Missile. These are the two sort of most important spells for you to have access to. Magic Missile's inability to miss helps a lot in all sorts of combat situations, and Shield is the best or second best defensive option in the game. It increases your AC by 5, which makes enemy attacks 25% less likely to hit you at all, so that's incredibly useful. I also highly recommend Grease and Fog Cloud. The utility on these spells can't be overstated. You can use them to block doorways. Fog Cloud has a whole bunch of uses, but one of the best ones is to cast it on yourself and then stand in it to prevent ranged attackers from being able to attack you. On your turn, you step out of it, fire a shot, and then step back into it before ending your turn, which stops ranged attackers from being able to see you. Grease, of course, lets you block doorways, and enemies that fail the saving throw and fall prone lose their whole turn, so that's incredibly powerful. Pushing enemies into grease fields can often be very useful as well. Finally, your last two spells matter a lot less. One that's worth mentioning, though, is Find Familiar. This has a ton of utility for scouting, for giving your rogues advantage and stuff like that. It is kind of annoying to use, so it's probably the most powerful option, but you will have to kind of look deep into yourself and see whether you have the mental fortitude to go with that. And then I also highly recommend Expeditious Retreat. This is one of your best movement options in the early game, and very useful to have. Some other options worth mentioning are Mage Armor. There are cases where you want that over the Shield and Light Armor, but the or over the light armor, but the mage armor will usually not be increased AC. In the early game it can be though, so keep in mind that that can be very useful. Long Strider is a day-long buff, and those are always good. It doesn't cost you a spell slot to use, you just have to know it, so if you get access to Long Strider, you should make sure to use it on your whole party right away. Alright, that's level 1. Let's go to a level 2 wizard. At level 2, we get to make the most important choice that wizards will make, and that is which subclass we're going to be. There are 8 subclasses, and they each have their own advantages and disadvantages. I won't talk about all of them, but I will mention 3 that I think are going to be the most likely ones that you're going to want. One is Evocation. If you just want to blast things and you're a little lazy about where you put your other teammates, Evocation is good because it lets you ignore... You can drop a fireball right on top of an ally and they won't take any damage. That's incredibly powerful if you're dropping fireballs on your allies. But usually you should be able to avoid doing that just through good placement of spells and good placement of your characters. So I think that Evocation is typically overshadowed by the other 2 that I want to mention. Necromancy is very good, not for the level 1 ability, which is or level 2 ability, which is pretty bad, but at level 6 you get additional summons of zombies whenever you use Animate Dead, and day-long summons are quite powerful, especially for a solo character, because they can really help keep you alive, avoid losing hit points, as well as just give you an advantage going into a fight. Extra action economy is always really good. Anything that your enemies are focusing on that isn't you is good, so extra summons is quite powerful. And finally, the one that we're going to take is Divination. Divination's a little bit complicated, because how it works is at the beginning of every day, you roll 2 d20s, mark down those numbers, and then any d20 roll that your character sees for the rest of the day, you can use a reaction to replace that roll with one of the numbers that you rolled. So you can turn misses into hits, you can turn hits into misses, you can turn saving throw failures into successes, and most importantly, you can force, if you have a low portent die, you can force enemies to fail saving throws. There's a lot of spells that you'll have access to that if an enemy fails a save, like Hold Person or Hypnotic Pattern, they're instantly out of the fight, so the ability to guarantee that they'll fail that save is super important. Divination Wizard, I think, is probably the most powerful in the game, and it's also, in my opinion, the most fun to use, because just saying, no, you can't do that, is so much fun. For our other 2 spells, we'll just keep taking ones that we haven't had access to yet, such as Long Strider and, let's say, Ice Knife. The cold surface from Ice Knife is still quite good. For our prepared spells, we're going to take... Oh, that's a little weird that it's showing me all the high-level spells here, But for our prepared spells, we definitely want Shield, and we definitely want Magic Missile, we're going to want Fog Cloud, and we're going to want Grease, and then the last ones, I think, will depend on the situation that you're in. We're now going to level up again, and we get to choose 2 more spells. And remember that you'll have continued to get more of these spells just from finding scrolls. You always want to learn every spell you see. It's really important to have the versatility. What wizards get compared to other characters is versatility. They will have less overall power, but they will have more spells in a day and more spells known than any other character, so you will be able to have the right spell, even if it does a little less damage than a sorcerer's version of that spell or a Tempest Cleric's version of that spell. It will be the right one for the occasion. I highly recommend learning Flaming Sphere. Enemies will target this, and it's incredibly valuable to have on the field. Also just good consistent damage that doesn't take your turn. And I like Cloud of Daggers a lot, although many of these other spells can be quite useful as well. Web is worth mentioning as well. At level 4, we get to upgrade our cantrips, and so we're just going to take whichever one we think is most useful here. Again, you don't really need a second damage cantrip, so I recommend taking something with utility, like Light or Friends, if you happen to be a party face. Usually the wizard shouldn't be, but sometimes it does happen. And Blade Ward can also be quite useful just because resistance is so powerful, but it does take an action, so you will have limited options to use it. I'm just going to make sure we're taking more spells, and I definitely like to get Gust of Wind in there. Moving enemies has a lot of utility. Knock can be very useful outside of combat, although I do recommend making this character also a lockpicker. For our feat, we're going to take bonus intelligence, although if you are doing this build solo, you might consider taking alert. Another option to take for the solo version of this character, alert, because it gives you, basically you win initiative every time, which is super important for a solo character. Another important feat to consider on casters, and this does require moving some stats around, is the resilient feat. You get to choose an ability and gain a stat in it, but more importantly gain proficiency in its saving throws. So you'll gain 1 point of Constitution, and that gives you Constitution save proficiency, which makes you much less likely to lose concentration when you take damage. That's incredibly important for this character, since you'll want to be concentrating on a spell every round of combat. Losing concentration is really bad for you, so gaining resilient Constitution can be worth a lot. If you do this, you'll want to move some stats around so that you have an odd number in Constitution, because you're only gaining 1 point of Constitution, so you'll want to go to 15 Con. That being said, for most of the time, the correct buy on this character is just going to be 2 more intelligence, so we're going to do that. Very important to max out your casting stat on these characters, because your casting stat determines the save DC of your spells, which means that enemies are more likely to fail against your spells the higher your intelligence is. At level 3, we get access to some of the most powerful spells in the game. Fireball is the gold standard for AoE damage, just a really good spell. Animate Dead has a lot of utility because you can use it to distract enemies, move them around the battlefield. The zombies can absorb hits. Haste, if you are in a party, is the best support spell in the game, and often the best thing for your character to do is to spend their turns concentrating on haste on a damage dealer. And finally, Counterspell is maybe the single most important spell in the game to have access to, because shutting down enemy spells is so important. Counterspell is the best thing you can do with your reaction, because it costs the enemy their entire turn, and you should learn the mechanics of Counterspell and kind of get a sense of what level enemies might be casting their spells at, so you can appropriately select the level of Counterspell to use in return. You want to counter with a spell slot of at least the level of that spell. So if an enemy casts Fireball, you can probably use a level 3 Counterspell. If they cast Wall of Fire, you should cast Counterspell at level 4 to guarantee that you counter the spell. So we'll take Counterspell and Haste for our support build, but for another build you might want Fireball. Remember again that we are going to get access to all of these spells, so which one we take on level up is less important, but these are the ones you definitely want. At this point also, it's worth going over what our prepared spells should be. We're still going to want these 4 because they're super powerful, but at level 2 you absolutely need to have Misty Step. This gives you a ton of mobility, and that's super important. Highly recommend having Flaming Sphere equipped as well. Scorching Ray is really good just because it's very consistent damage output. And Haste is, like we mentioned, the best support spell in the game, and Counterspell, of course, is very important as well. You could also take down, say, Grease or Flaming Sphere, and I probably would say to do this for 1 more control spell from the level 3 spell slot. And Hypnotic Pattern is the best of these. It only requires the enemies to fail 1 save. They don't get a save on subsequent turns, unlike many other control spells. And you can use your Portent dice to guarantee an enemy goes out of the game when you hit them with Hypnotic Pattern. Do remember that it takes concentration, though, so you are limited to casting that. You can't have this and Haste or this and Flaming Sphere up at the same time. At this point, we're at an interesting crossroads. We only need to get to Wizard level 11 to hit 6th level spells, which means that we probably are going to want a 1 level dip in another class. When we take that dip is pretty interesting for this character. At level 6, we get our subclass feature, which is an extra portent die for divination wizards. Strong, but not incredibly strong. So, having just gotten access to level 3 spells, I think that the best place to put our 1 level dip is starting at level 5 going to level 6. You will often, especially if you're solo, and if you don't think this is cheating, which it sort of is, want to respec on odd levels to remove your cleric dip to, spoilers, we're going cleric, to get access to the next level up of wizard spells. But remember that you can still learn that level of wizard spells from scrolls, so the one level of cleric doesn't slow your spell progression the way it would for another casting character. If we had 6 levels of sorcerer, or 5 levels of sorcerer, 1 level of cleric, 6 levels of sorcerer, 1 level of cleric, we'd only be able to cast level 3 sorcerer spells, but with wizard we can still cast level 4 wizard spells. So we're going to take a level of cleric here. You could move this level significantly earlier for that reason, but assuming that you want to keep this build relatively pure in wizard, I like getting the 5 levels of wizard. It just feels more wizardy, but it is probably more optimal to take this cleric dip on level 1 or level 2. The reason for this is that the cleric domains give you access to armor proficiencies, as well as a bunch of really powerful class features. So we want to take one of life, nature, tempest, or war domain, because those all give you access to heavy armor. Tempest and War give you access to martial weapons, which is less important, but the other two are quite useful. Nature Domain giving you Druid cantrips is not particularly valuable, and getting proficiency in animal handling, nature, or survival basically doesn't matter for most characters, so I think that the best of these is the Life Domain. Getting Bless means that you have yet another one of the best support spells in the game available, and getting access to Cure Wounds, and more importantly, Healing Word, with the bonus healing from the Life Domain Cleric ability, is super powerful. You also get a single utility spell. Don't take anything that requires the enemies to make a save DC, because we're not going to have the wisdom to do that, but you can take something like Healing Word. Sanctuary is incredibly powerful when used in the right situations, so I would take that and just use that situationally. And then you also have a little bit of healing and the very powerful Bless. For your cantrips, you'll take Guidance and Resistance. Getting those is incredibly good, and then just whatever for your third one. And then we're going to go back to Wizard. Here we'll just take any spells, and we get access to our level 6 Wizard feature, giving us 3 portent dice, which is quite useful, and the ability to recover them occasionally. Just getting more dice means a higher chance of having a really good number, like a 1 or a 20 come up. Extremes are better than middle numbers, so also when you're using the portent dice, something to keep in mind is the game only gives you the prompt if it would change the result. So if an enemy attacks you and hits, and it prompts you to use a portent die, that is it saying you can change this hit to a miss. And if it lets you do that with like a 10 or 11, do it, because that the 10 is not super valuable. If it lets you do it with a 1, think about it, because the 1 might be more important on a different spell, on a different effect. Here we are going to get access to higher level spells. Notice that we didn't get to choose level 4 spells on level up last time, but we could, at Wizard 6, Cleric 1, learn these level 4 spells from scrolls. So which spells you choose is going to be somewhat dependent on what scrolls you've already found and learned. Conjure Minor Elemental has a lot of utility, so I like having that one available, and then Banishment is quite good, Ice Storm is good. The most important is Wall of Fire, which my Gale here already knows, but it's very, very powerful and will solve a lot of encounters all on its own. Evard's Black Tentacles is also quite strong, because it prevents enemies from moving and taking actions, which is super powerful. A little weird showing these level ups, because it's only offering me to learn the spells I haven't taught him from a scroll. So we're having to switch to the prepared spell section to see what we're actually getting. Here, of course, we're going to continue to boost our intelligence, although at this point you'll have a better sense of whether you want to get resilient in Constitution or whether you want to get alert. Warcaster is good because it gives you advantage on saving throws for concentration, but Resilience, I think, is typically better because it also gives you the point of Constitution, which lets you improve your attributes elsewhere. Like, we could have 16 Dex and 16 Con with Resilient, and it's about the same bonus. Warcaster is typically a slightly higher bonus to your concentration checks, but overall it's better to boost all of your attributes as well. But we're just going to get to 20 intelligence here. Continue to learn more spells as we level up. Cloud Kill, I think, is a pretty good level 5 spell, so I would try to have that prepared as well. That will give you quite a lot of options because it does tons of damage and it forces enemies to move. You can also take your action to move it 10 feet, which is not great, but useful sometimes because enemies will often stop just slightly out of your spells, so this is a really good damaging option. We'll continue to take whatever cantrip we happen to want. Doesn't really matter at this point. And finally, we are going to level up and get access to level 6 spells. Level 6 spells carry with them a bunch of options. Create mummies is really powerful, especially if you went the necromancer route. Disintegrate, because enemies will often fail the save thanks to if you are a diviner, means that you are going to be doing a ton of damage to them. Another really important spell to have access to is Globe of Invulnerability. This can be a ton of utility in various fights, and I really like having access to this spell because often the AI just doesn't know what to do about it, so you can really give them problems. And then finally, Otto's Irresistible Dance. If you can force an enemy to fail the save with your diviner spell, just takes an enemy instantly out of the fight. Super powerful to do that. So Irresistible Dance is one of the best spells to have on a divination wizard, especially because any enemy that fails the spell will lose the fight immediately. So there you have it. That is my pick for the best wizard and sort of why we're taking each spell and what you can do with them. I will also mention very quickly 2 items that are particularly interesting for this character, and those are the Gloves of Dexterity, which you get late in Act 1 or early in Act 2, depending on how you count it. This will allow you to reduce your Dexterity to 8 and still have 18 Dexterity. Gives you a ton of extra AC when using light or medium armor, or no armor, of course, with mage armor, as well as helping you win initiative. Those are super valuable. And the Bracers of Defense, which you get earlier and can often make the difference between wanting to wear sort of medium quality light armor, like this 13 armor, that the mage armor plus the Bracers of Defense will often be more AC, so you should keep an eye out for whether you are gaining more AC this way or the other way. You can also, with this build, if you want more power, move the Cleric level to level 2, or level 1 even. That will get you heavy armor earlier, as well as all of the Cleric boosts, while still giving you all the Wizard goodies because of how Wizard works. But I really wanted to showcase a build that kind of focused on Wizard and used it as the primary feature of the build. And of course, if you don't want to do that, there are lots of options for taking things like 5 levels in Eldritch Knight to gain Action Surge, and so on, but those will be builds that will show up in the future. Alright, my friends, thanks so much for watching, and if there's a build that you'd like to see me cover in future, I'm very open to requests, so do let me know. And of course, you can like the video, leave a comment for the algorithm, because that helps a ton with the algorithm, and I appreciate getting those, and subscribe to my channel for more of this and other strategy game content. Cheers, my friends, and I'll catch you next time.